when you guys show up. It's always great to have faces here and some names popping up here and just some discussion going on, right? When we're talking about this real estate stuff, because this is for anybody that takes this class, for the vast majority, this is all new information, right? Maybe you've been involved in a transaction, maybe you've bought or sold a house before, maybe you've rented a house or an apartment before. But when we get down to the nitty gritty and to the foundations of this stuff, hopefully it becomes a little bit more clear for you. Well, let's jump into chapter 2 and start talking about that a little bit. Chapter 2, I feel we'll go a little bit more quickly just because it's kind of general in some sense. There's a lot of the chapter, which is kind of interesting to read through, but there's a bit of chapter 2 that talks about the history of real estate. And this goes, beyond, before the history of the US. But the idea of real estate and the ownership of real estate, basically, again, those dirt and structures and where that comes from and the laws that surround it and all that stuff. So it can be a little bit broad. When you're reading through it, if it feels overwhelming, kind of try to read it as a story, if that makes sense. Outside of that unit quiz and maybe the final a little bit, that stuff, the history of real estate, isn't so much going to be the in the long run. Not much of that on the real estate exam. And in real life, you're not going to have to memorize any of this history stuff. So hopefully that helps you feel a little bit more calm, understanding when you read through that. Again, it can be interesting to read, but don't feel like you have to memorize it. Again, think of it as a story when you're going through the chapter. So I'm not even going to really address any of that history stuff. I do want to talk a little bit as we go through chapter 2, some defining, and this one is kind of an important concept to understand. It starts to talk about the ideal of real property, and I've given several examples, but and the separation of personal property and how it's different. So let me go ahead and give you a comparison a little bit here. Real property, and they'll show you a picture in the book, but the idea of real property, when you think about ownership of real property, here's the earth and the center of the earth. And it shows you kind of this idea of a V. And so that, I'm actually going to zoom in. What? When you have this house and this tree and this yard that lives on the earth right here, basically what you own in real estate is from the center of the earth out to the sky, right? But in real life, somebody else owns the mineral rights underneath your property, most likely. If there's a river at the back of your property, I mean, yeah, you can use it and it's not fenced off. You can probably jump in there. But most likely somebody else owns the right to that water. They call it riparian rights. When an airplane flies over your house, do you think that, the local airport is going to be paying you because of the noise that they're giving your property because you own that space, right? Of course not, right? So the idea is that you kind of own this, from the center of earth up to the sky. But in reality, you can't just do what you want with that space, right? Where this could come into play, though, say, for example, is your neighbor has a huge tree in their yard. And on your property line, on your fence, this tree is growing over. Can you cut that tree on the fence? The answer is yes. Because if you own this land and that tree is hanging over your fence, can you collect the fruit that's on your side of the fence? Absolutely. And you can get up there and just chop it right off. Now you might want to have a conversation with your neighbor, right? You wouldn't want to do something that would like hurt or kill the tree, but you own that space. And so you have a right to use that space and you have the right to not let somebody else use it, if that makes sense. We talk a little bit more of that in a future chapter on encumbrances. I think it's chapter 5 talks more about encumbrances and easements and that kind of thing. And that's somebody else using your land. But in most cases, right, on your fence line, you have the ability to cut that tree. What it really comes down to when we're talking about real estate is what rights you have, what you can and can't do when you own that property, when you own that dirt and the building that's on that dirt. We also get some really interesting terms called fixtures, right? So we're thinking about that chandelier, that antique chandelier that's screwed into the ceiling and the electrical wires are tied up into the ceiling and it's hanging there giving light, right? So that chandelier is considered a fixture because it's attached. And so this chapter goes through a couple of definitions like this, but these are a couple important ones. Now, if we have a lamp that I can go and pick up, like my little lamp right here, and it plugs into the wall, that is not a fixture, right? We can just go unplug it and move it. So that is not attached. That is not a fixture. That is not part of the dirt in the structure. We can move that. That's considered personal property. We'll talk about that in just a second. Well, we'll do it now. Our personal property, I'm going to call that stuff, right? Your car, the lamp in the corner that plugs into the wall, the bookshelf full of books, right? That's stuff. It can move. It is not connected, bolted down, or wired up in the ceiling. That is called personal property. The term it's often used for this in identifying personal property is movable. Is it movable? Then it's personal property. So on the real property side, we're talking about the dirt and the structure, the fixtures that are attached to it. And there is also another term that comes up called appurtenant. And this is where you really come in and you're like, wait, I grew up speaking English and I've never heard that word before, right? The word appurtenant is not a normal conversational word. What it means is that it goes with the land. So you might hear a term that says something like, in this house, there is a fixture, a chandelier that is a fixture. It's attached. Or a chandelier that is attached to the property. That means it's a fixture. It goes with the real estate. You might also hear something like, the house has a river in the back that is an appurtenant easement, meaning somebody can use it and it goes with the land, right? You heard that word appurtenant. That word appurtenant means it goes with the land. So just a couple little words there. Again, you'll read them in the chapter, but hopefully I can give you a little bit of insight here and that'll help you remember. So there's our big difference between real property, dirt, structure, things that are fixed to it, things that go with it, versus personal stuff like your pen, your paper, your computer, your phone, your car, that's pretty easily movable. And it can usually be sold as well with a simple bill of sale, a simple receipt when you buy it, right? Personal property. Pretty easy to transfer. Surveying is talked about in this chapter a little bit. And it's funny too, because when I read through this section about surveying, I see terms like meets and bounds. And you see examples of a township and how the township is numbered and tracked and cut up. The plot map, right? And this one is a little bit more functional, but where your property sits on other properties. Now, these days, it's kind of easy to see this stuff. I can hop on Google Maps on my phone, and when you zoom in far enough, I can actually see a pretty well-defined outline of my property, my house, and the address, right? So in the past, this stuff all looked very different and was tracked very specifically at the county recorder's office, and it's still tracked there. But we have access to this information in a lot of different ways now, a lot easier ways. But if you had to, you could go down to the county recorder's office and pull up this information to find out what your lot number is, the dimensions of your lot. That actually shows up on a plot map. But as an agent going in, these are terms, you'll read them, you'll see them. But in real life, we look at this stuff, and when I read it, I think somebody else is going to know this, right? I can find it at the county recorder's office if I have to get it, or I can call up the title company to also get it. And so I'll talk in just a minute about some of the services that are related to real estate, where although you're learning some of these, pebbles in the foundation, when we're talking about some of these terms, I don't want you to spend too much time. I don't want you to memorize this stuff, especially in this section, because at the end of the day, it's not really going to help you. Understanding the idea, how it's, recognizing what it's talking about, how a property is cut up, and how you identify the property in this larger section. It's important to know, but you're not going to have to know exactly how to do it and how to find it. In this section also in your book talks about square feet and how to calculate square feet. Now, functionally, I've found a lot of use and function in this as a real estate agent, but for the sake of the real estate exam, especially in this section, they start talking about math problems. In the past, the real estate exam had a lot more math. These days, it's not that much math. And so if math scares you, if math is intimidating for you, if you have test anxiety and you hate math, please take a breath and realize that this real estate salesperson exam from the Department of Real Estate is not going to have a ton of math on it. So I'm going to give you the advice now really quickly, but more in depth when you take Real Estate 250, the crash course, the real estate exam, salesperson's exam test prep. That sounds too long, but I hope you understand what I'm talking about. There's not that much math. If you have to, you can skip the math questions and you can still pass, right? So don't let math freak you out or stress you out. I know most people hate math, especially when it comes to a new area like in real estate that you're learning about now. So recognize what these are for, but don't feel like you have to memorize every one of these definitions when you come across them in the chapter. I'll focus, and this is a little bit more practical than it is about passing a chapter or understanding a chapter. The idea of services within real estate is super helpful because as an agent, it's just impossible to be able to do everything. And there's just things you can't do yourself. One of the biggest services that come into play in real estate is called title insurance. You will most likely have a title rep that will contact you as an agent and say, "Hi, my name is Sarah, and let me know if you have any questions about title. Can I pull a title report for you? Can I get you the property information on that property? Can I send you some comps that have sold recently?" The title, and these days, there's some also very fancy apps on your phone that you might be able to use from a title company that can let you look up information on property, like square footage and lot sizes and number of bedrooms and baths that show up publicly. Now, general public has access to this information, but the general public would usually have to go down to the county recorder's office and pull this information themselves. The title rep, the title company that will issue a title report in hopes that you will pay them or the seller will pay them in the future for title insurance. Did you catch all that? All of that is kind of wrapped up in this idea of the company that's servicing you with supplying you with valid, useful, helpful information that you will need to have. That's part of public record largely, but they readily have accessible because that's what they specialize in. So I'll repeat those words again, just so you can recognize what I'm saying. The title rep is helping you with public information that's pulled together by the title company. That title company is going to issue you a title report or maybe a preliminary title report that shows you what types of easements and square footage and bedrooms and baths and who owns the property and how much it sold for last time. And all of that information up front, they want to kind of they want to earn your business, because when it comes time for that seller to purchase title insurance, which is almost always happens in a transaction, the seller goes, "Oh, hey, great, you have this awesome title rep, this awesome title company that gave me this great title report. I'm going to pay them for the title insurance." That's how that process goes. Hopefully that makes sense. In parentheses, I'm putting in here recorded, or the recorder. Okay, battery. Well, I'm getting notifications all over the place. The recorder's office houses a lot of information. This is kind of the public place. And we'll talk about the transfer of title in another chapter, but when a property closes and the title is recorded, that's where it's officially held, at the county recorder's office. So in large part, the title company is pulling information out of the recorder's office. You could go find it yourself, most likely, again, because it's public, but there's a lot of extra steps in getting that information. So title services are a huge help in transactions. There's also services, and I don't want to jump the gun too far on here, but just to give you an idea of how much of these services you are relying on as a real estate agent. In a transaction, there's something called natural hazards report. And this report is usually required because it gives the seller the required disclosures that they need to give the buyer. So in large part, these companies gather all this information about a property, whether it's in an earthquake zone, a flood zone, a fire zone, there was a military base close by that might have, hazardous materials still housed in the dirt, high winds or tornado areas, right? These natural hazards report is super helpful. And so you'll be learning about some of these requirements and disclosures, like what is an earthquake zone? Well, there's a certain answer to that. I don't want to talk about it now, but the idea is in real life, you have a lot of services that are helping you in a transaction. You don't have to know everything about a property, but you do have to know how to find the information, if that makes sense. And then, although as a salesperson, you want to always have an appraisal to look at for a property, this is just another one of those things that happens in a normal process. Whenever there's a bank involved in a transaction, they're going to require an appraisal. And this is just another one of those ways where you can learn more about a property. Not just about the comps, and you'll learn more about those in a few weeks, and how you figure out pricing on a property, which is what the appraisal is for the bank to ensure that value. But the appraisal also pulls up information that can be coming from title, that can be coming from the recorder's office, that can be coming from an appraiser who is actually measuring the house. That happens too. So this is just one of those other things I just want to throw out there so that as an agent, you don't have to know everything. There's no way you can know everything. There's no way you can know everything about every single property. There's a lot of services and information that are gathered, and a lot of people that kind of create this real estate team as you're involved in a transaction. And of course, all of this is still going to feel overwhelming for you. So don't feel like you're alone in that. It's okay to feel overwhelmed. This is all new information. I'm going to say again now, when you go out and start working, that's when you really focus in on how the day in and day out works. Don't worry about that yet. We're really just scratching the surface right now on foundations of real estate, how real estate transactions work, how property works, right? Don't feel like you have to understand it all before you get licensed. It's not going to happen. It's super important for you to find a broker who you're going to be working under, who is liable for you. It's important to find a broker who is going to support you and train you. Most brokerages don't do a good job at this. I'll just say that. So look for ones that offer some sort of training as you move forward in your steps and get closer to your license. So that's it for chapter 2. I don't see any questions in the chat. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording so I can answer any questions verbally. Again, a little bit shorter chapter, but a lot of that, this chapter again talks about history. And I just want to make sure that some of these other concepts I was able to go over and talk about in some normal language that can hopefully overlap and make more sense for you when you start reading about them. Thanks so much for being here. I'll hang out for a few more minutes.